Yeah, well, it's green. There we go. 2, 4, 6. All right. I'm glad that we have this live stream so that people can be here who may not have known where the venue was. And full disclosure, I was over at the library all ready to have this happen at 10 to 6 because I got it in my head that it was the library because I remember in the past we've done these things over there. So I had time to scramble over here. But thanks to the candidates, of course, first and foremost, for being willing to do this and for being willing to do the public forum component. Many folks in the city know that I'm an attorney, and so although this is one of the 4 city commission hires, it's one that I'm particularly interested in. And if I can just frame this a little bit for members of the community, this is a big job, and it spans a lot of territory, and that is unfortunate but unavoidable. I always tell people there are lots of things in the law that I won't do for you, no matter how badly you might want to hire me. I will not write a will. I will not do environmental law. Unfortunately, city attorneys have to do, as the 3 of you know, and as the community may or may not know, you have to do municipal law, you have to do finance, you have to do litigation on behalf of the city, you have to be the person in charge of the criminal processes for cases that the city handles criminally, for the misdemeanors, but also civil infractions, and you're also the chief counsel for the commission, and that in itself is a big job and takes navigation and finesse, because I don't know anybody in the world who wants to have 7 bosses on purpose, but that's what the job description is. So there's a lot that goes into this, a lot of training elected officials, frankly, on legal points that they may or may not understand, confidentiality, what can be said in closed session, what can't be said in closed session, helping the commission be fully accountable and transparent to the public. So it's a daunting job, and I certainly want to thank all 3 of you for being willing to step up and do the work. Briefly, I also want to acknowledge that one of my colleagues from City Commission is here in the flesh. I'm assuming the others are all online, but Commissioner Knight's with us tonight. And so I will, without further ado, go sit in the audience and start listening. But thank you, and it's a big job. So. Thanks for being willing to consider it. Oh, I'm sorry. Right, our faithful interpreter, who doesn't always have to remind me that she's here to interpret, is in fact here to interpret. If anyone in the audience needs that assistance, she's here to translate from English.
My name is Sandra, and I come from the interpreting body of the Hispanic Center, and I'm here to interpret for anybody who would need interpretation from Spanish to English and English to Spanish. Mi nombre es Sandra. Estoy aquí para ayudarles a traducir cualquier comunicación que puedan tener de español a inglés y de inglés a español. Gracias.
All right. You guys can have seats.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, for the opening comments. And as the candidates are getting seated in any particular order, I will have just a couple of brief remarks about tonight's event. How we got here. This is the conclusion of the city attorney recruitment and the beginning of the selection process. These candidates have been through a torture test today of 1 reception with city executives and 4 panel interviews, and now a 2-hour public forum tonight. So I just really want to say thank you to the 3 of them before we start their introductions. It's been a daunting process and still more to go. Tonight's format, once we get started, will be an opportunity for each of the 3 candidates to introduce themselves to the community, both those that are here and those that are watching live. We'll allow about 3 or 4 minutes for each introduction, and then we have a series of prepared questions for the candidates tonight. Those questions were developed and guided and shaped by input from the community. At the beginning of the search process, I did a pretty extensive amount of stakeholder engagement on behalf of the city, meeting with a variety of stakeholders that were identified. And based on topics that were developed out of those meetings, the city produced a survey shortly after March 17th, offering the opportunity for community to prioritize which of those topics were most important. And based on that, we created the questions for tonight's event. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the introductions tonight. I would ask each of the candidates that the microphone in front of you has a push button. Green is active, red is not. Please be sure to use it each time you're talking or not talking. That will definitely help with those that are watching at home. And we will start left to right with Sarah. If you wouldn't mind, please introducing yourself to everyone.
Good evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Hartman. I am the current Director of Legal Affairs for the Civil Litigation Division here at the city. I've held that role for a little more than 6 months at this point, but I've been in the Civil Litigation Division for the city for more than 5 years. I came to the city of Grand Rapids in this role after spending some time in private practice handling a lot of the same types of litigation and lawsuits that the city is now faced with, as are many other municipalities. I brought with me the experience also in the realm of labor and employment law, which I had from private practice as well. Something that the city has traditionally outsourced to outside firms, so I've had a lot of work in the area of labor and employment law, especially since we've been actively searching for an HR director for some time now. I grew up outside Chicago, but have called West Michigan and particularly Southwest Michigan my home for more than 20 years now. My husband's family is from Kalamazoo, so I relocated there shortly after I graduated from undergrad and have lived between Grand Rapids, St. Joe, and Kalamazoo area for work, school, and ultimately my wonderful practice here with the city since the early 2000s. I very much would love to have the opportunity to be the next city attorney, and I think that my experience and dedication to the city speak volumes.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Cross. I am the one outside candidate here. I'll kind of start with a little bit of personal background, how I got here. I grew up around local government. My dad was a firefighter my whole life. That's what I was planning to do when I graduated from high school and did for a short period of time. But in that experience, watching, I go to commission meetings with my dad and watched how local government functioned. And from that moment, I was kind of very intrigued by watching how democracy works on this local scale, because I think it's one of the few levels of government now that perhaps has some level of functionality to it. I think there's a lot of dysfunction at the state and federal level that is usually lacking at the local level, but that's why I was very intentional when I chose municipal law. It's something I enjoy doing very much. I've been doing it, I've been practicing 13 years. I'm currently a partner at Cummings, McClory, Davis & Atcho. That's really most of what we do. That's all that I do, but our firm really specializes in municipal law. Right now, my practice is sort of divided into two different categories. It varies, the breakdown varies on the week, but half of it more or less is spent litigating cases in state and federal court and administrative agencies. And that the variety there is lots of civil rights litigation, FOIA, OMA, employment disputes, things like that. There's really, it's a very long list of cases that I am called on to handle, but the other half of my time is spent with general representation, which is, providing guidance to the elected officials and members of boards and commissions. Currently, I represent two home rule cities, which have the same city manager, commission manager form of government that Grand Rapids has, a general law township, a county zoning board, and also a regional health department. So, in that capacity, I have my hands on a lot of different buckets. There's a lot of different patchwork statutory schemes that apply to these different clients. So I'm called on to interpret all those and make sure they're applied correctly. And so I think that, bringing it back to this role in particular, the way that the law department is broken out into the three divisions, I think the nice thing that I have is a bit of experience touching all of those areas of the law. I handle municipal prosecutions, That's misdemeanors and civil infractions. I handle, again, those civil rights cases. I handle general guidance to elected officials. So I think I'm well suited to fill this position. I am very excited by the work that the City Commission is doing. That was something that I wouldn't honestly have applied for the job if that hadn't been the case. I think that the city is trying to solve some really complex problems, taking some bold action to do it. And I'm very excited by potentially being a part of that work. I think some of my clients, unfortunately, are maybe a little more risk averse and are kind of nibbling at the edges, where I think that this City Commission seems to want to really take some decisive, bold action and perhaps operate in some gray space that requires someone with my background that's familiar working in those arenas where the answer's not always clear. And we kind of have to get to the best possible option based on some ambiguities in the law, maybe taking advantage of some of those just to try to solve some of these complex problems. But I'll end it there. I want to say thank you to Greg and to the city for having me here. This is, for those of you who haven't been through this process before, this is a pretty intense panel that we're going through, unlike anything else I've been through before. But the number of people that showed up for these panels this morning, I think, is impressive, and I think speaks volumes about the city and its desire to get input from all the stakeholders in the community. So thank you.
All right, welcome. Thank you for all your work, Greg. Thank you for the commission. My name's Phil Strom. Thank you to the other candidates for the great conversations throughout the day. I'm currently the interim city attorney. I've been doing that for 7 months now. When my friend and mentor Anita Hitchcock retired, it was a great honor to be asked to step into that role and serve as the city attorney on an interim basis while the commission did a recruitment and a broad nationwide search to see who might else be interested. And so before that, I was the deputy city attorney, and we'll get to how I found myself in that role. But I was born and raised in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, in a town called Escanaba, Michigan, a place where I feel like my work ethic really was ingrained into me. Up in the UP, you have very few people sometimes doing a lot of work with less resources financially. We are incredibly hardworking, and that's something that I've tried to demonstrate over the last 7 months. We are helpers. We shovel snow for our neighbors when they need to get shoveled out, and sometimes they shovel snow for us, and that's just who we are. That's my family has practiced law in the UP for 4 generations, and funny enough, my grandfather, Wheaton Strom, was admitted to the bar in Grand Rapids, so it feels almost kindred that I'm here before you, continuing some familial service to the city of Grand Rapids. But I went to Kalamazoo, Western Michigan University for my undergrad, went to Cooley Law School in Lansing for law school, where I kind of got bit by the public service bug. I worked for a clinic called the 60 Plus Elder Law Clinic, where we provided free legal advice to seniors in our community. And it was through that experience that I saw, in addition to watching my family practice law, how much good lawyers can do for people and for a community. I graduated in 2009, moved back home to proudly serve with my dad and his twin brother in a small family practice in downtown Escanaba, Michigan. I felt like I could help the community and add the most value to the law firm at that time by practicing in areas that the firm hadn't traditionally practiced in. So I got on the court appointed list, and I started going and representing people that had been charged with crimes that couldn't afford their own lawyers. Back then, the court appointed process looked a lot different than it does now. I had a lot of visits to the jail to talk to people that were experiencing difficulty in their life, and learned a lot about the criminal justice system and some of the fractures in the problems, quite frankly, that the criminal justice system was facing. I was asked through a couple years after serving on the court-appointed list to join the prosecutor's office. And I felt conflicted because I was enjoying practicing with my family so much, but I saw it as a real opportunity to independently grow and to be a government public servant. And I joined the prosecutor's office as an assistant prosecutor, prosecuting misdemeanor cases, worked my way up to chief assistant where I started to practice felony prosecution work. And upon my boss's election to the district court bench, I was appointed by the circuit court judge to serve as the elected prosecutor. At that time, Judge Davis told me that there is great responsibility with being a prosecutor. You impact people's lives in a way that most judges don't, because you make decisions that impact their freedom and their liberty. And so you should lose sleep at night about the great responsibility that comes along with being a prosecutor. And I never forgot that. Through that appointment, I served out the term. I ran for election. It was not contested, but it was an experience in and of itself. We changed the justice system in Delta County to be more rehabilitative and more restorative, and that was something I'm very proud of. We started the first drug court. We embraced mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment. I was an elected official for the Board of Trustees for Bay College up there, and transitioned into the county administrator role. I fell in love with corporate counsel work. I have been doing that as a deputy city attorney. I got a bit burnt out on criminal justice sole practice, and through my deputy city attorney position, I've been able to really be involved in a lot of different places in this organization, in this community. I live in Grand Rapids, have lived here since I came down to work for the city, and I'm proud of that too.
All right, thank you all three. And we're next going to move into the questions. And how this is going to work is, again, we have a series of prepared questions on topics that were prioritized by the community. I'll ask in a rotating order one candidate to answer the question, and then give each of the other two candidates the opportunity to respond to that same question, and then we'll move to the next question and rotate, so everybody gets an equal opportunity to start first. So with that, before I begin that, I just want to say, and we will say again throughout the evening, your feedback does matter, and there is an opportunity to collect feedback in a couple of ways. For those that are here tonight, you can provide your feedback on a written form, which we'll collect, or there's a QR code. For those that are watching remotely, there should be a QR code on your screen, and that will take you to a very brief survey. It should only take you a couple of minutes, and that feedback will be shared with the City Commission at the end of their interview tomorrow. And moving into the questions. Question number one, this time we'll start with Sarah. How would you ensure that policing practices in the city consistently meet constitutional standards, especially around search, seizure, and use of force?
Thank you, Greg. As a litigation attorney, which has been my primary practice, I obviously delve a lot into this area from a standpoint of what has happened to get us to a lawsuit. So on the other end of that, I have, in my experience already, anytime there are issues that are unconstitutional, obviously the first and foremost thing I'm going to do is talk with my client, which is usually the commissioners, as well as the police chief and those stakeholders, to say, look, we have a problem here. This case, these officers acted outside the confines of the law, and we need to resolve it. But absent that, we also do a fair amount of analysis after the fact. We'll get through the current lawsuit and advise the department and key stakeholders regarding what could have been done better and what maybe the policies and practices are that need to change. I do that routinely with officers who I'm currently representing in their capacity as city employees and say, look, this might be okay, it might be legal, but we probably have a better way to do this, and there might be some impacts there. But as far as setting the policy itself, that's more the role of the police chief. That's the role of the city commissioners to actually steer in a particular direction. And it's the job of the city attorney to help the key stakeholders, the client, to get to the place that they want to go. If those policies impact employment situation, I've also helped the city through the last 2 bargaining sessions, including with the police unions, to negotiate different terms, whether those are regarding discipline or additional oversight. And that's just something that I think that we can continue to work cooperatively and collaboratively with our police department, who are city employees and part of this community as well.
All right, thank you. And Matt?
Okay. I suspect that our answers are going to get progressively shorter as you hear from all 3 of us, because there's going to be a lot of redundancy. But like Sarah, I spent a lot of time litigating excessive force cases. I actually have 2 excessive force cases pending right now in federal court and 1 unlawful search and seizure. So I agree. I mean, that's a great method to sort of look at a particular case and see what could be improved to do better. Another thing that I do, I mean, I have given trainings directly to police departments before, sort of proactive training, just sort of a refresher, like, hey, these are the parameters, these are sort of the confines we need to stay in. I also try to keep an eye out. I mean, like, I'm sure all of us, we get emails, I think on a daily basis, of new opinions that come out from Michigan Lawyers Weekly. So that's something that I'm always keeping an eye on, any changes in the law, any nuances, because when we look at these cases, oftentimes what the court is going to look at, among other things, is whether our officer has violated a clearly established constitutional right, and sometimes that changes because you know, while the courts don't require an identical case to say that it's a clearly established right, they do look at similarities, and as new cases come out, as the Sixth Circuit weighs in, more often the Sixth Circuit weighs in on whether a right is clearly established, it's important to know whether that changes. So that's really what I do. I mean, again, like Sarah, I will react to litigation, defend it, look for any things that could be fixed moving forward, but I think it's also important to, you know, proactively train officers as best you can, emphasizing things like de-escalation, which, you know, I am sometimes a little surprised at the lack of policies that I see. Not here. I can't speak to the city of Grand Rapids. I'm not that familiar yet, so don't think I'm talking about this city. But plenty of cities I've represented before, just the lack of on-point policies that I think that could be fixed before these actually become issues.
Thank you. Matt and Phil?
I would say it starts with being present. You got to show up and you got to look these new officers in the eye, and we do that in our department. We train every recruit that comes through, and we talk to them, and we tell them what the community's expectations are. Communication has to start with physical presence and being in the room and listening to the officers, but maybe more importantly, listening to the community and knowing the law and being confident in your knowledge of the law when you're conducting these trainings, that you're equipping the officers with the right tools so they can go out and do their job well. I think presence and communication is a big part of that, in addition to the shepherding of the litigation and monitoring the current developments of the law.
All right, thank you, 3. And we'll move to the next question and start this with Matt. And that question is, what is your approach to prosecuting or declining to prosecute low-level offenses in the interest of broader public safety?
All right, thank you for that. I want to start just with a real quick story. It's one that is always going to stick with me. And so I was prosecuting I was at least presented with a charge to prosecute a claim. It is a disorderly gentleman up north, and all we knew at the time was that he was picking fights with people at a convenience store. So first blush seems pretty clear that this was someone who was causing a disturbance, clearly violating the ordinance. Well, come to find out, shortly thereafter, I get a call from his son after we've charged him, and he's awaiting his arraignment. And the son tells me a little bit more about what's going on. And what was really happening was his dad was going through essentially a complete psychotic break. His grandfather apparently had suffered the same thing years prior. So knowing a little bit more about what the guy was going through, it was at that point that I kind of pivoted. My posture at that point wasn't to punish this guy because I don't see how that does the community any good. My focus at that point was to try to get him the treatment that he needed. So that was a scenario where I wish I could tell you it had a happy ending. It doesn't, because it was at that point I kind of realized some of the gaps in the resources that we have available to us. We were able to get him examined at a hospital, and only at that point did I realize, after talking to the county prosecutor, that this had happened not that long ago, and they did the same thing, and the hospital said he was fine. So the gentleman got released, almost immediately reoffended, and that was one of those situations where, it wasn't. It was, in one sense, an easy decision, because I don't think the equitable thing there was to charge this guy who, he was having trouble making rent. He's clearly going through a mental health episode. So I didn't think the equitable thing there was to charge him with anything. So that's something that I always take into account. And we see so often, what I see is when someone is charged with a crime, it's either related to economic circumstances, mental health, or both. There's a lot of overlap, I think. And anytime someone comes in front of me who pretty clearly has, this is someone who's gotten 3 OWIs in 3 weeks. Those are people where I always, and I was glad to hear Phil say that, his efforts to create a treatment court, that's something I try to take advantage of as often as possible. If someone is eligible for that deferment, I think it makes sense, to send them there, to get them the help that they need, because sometimes, don't get me wrong, sometimes people violate the law. There's no good reason for it. There's no excuse for it. They need to be held to account. But I think it's important to, take people as you find them, to be empathetic, to listen to what is going on in their lives. And, I always try to take into account all of that, and not just looking at the plain letter of the law and whether I can sustain a conviction or not.
Thank you, Matt. And Phil, I'll ask you to speak to that one.
Sure. This is important to me. I spent the last year over in our district court group of enforcement division. And like Matt mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities for restorative justice, rehabilitative justice. We operate a diversion program, and there's room to grow this diversion program. My motto in this respect is, if there's an opportunity for someone to leave the criminal justice system in a better place than they entered it, we should be embracing that. We owe the community, we have a responsibility to help them leave the criminal justice system in a better place than how they entered it. Reducing recidivism is critical to long-term community health and public safety. And when people come into our district court because they have they're driving with a suspended license, we take every opportunity to help them get their driver's license back, dismiss the case, and allow them to go on a diversion program and avoid a conviction and other costs that might make that harder for them to maintain their driver's license and get through their day. Life is hard right now, and the criminal justice system can be unforgiving if we don't work hard to pull on the levers that help people. And sometimes that takes more work, and sometimes people aren't interested in being a part of that, and that's okay too if individuals want to pay their fine and go on their way. But right now, our diversion program is really thriving. We work together with the 61st District Court to apply for grants to help fund those efforts and resource those efforts. But I think we can do more. I know that we can do more, and I'm committed to finding some of those opportunities along the way.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Well, I will start by saying that my counterparts here have abundantly more prosecutorial experience than I have. I've spent most of my time in the civil litigation world and less in the criminal litigation world. But the limited experience that I do have has been mostly in a support or kind of fill-in capacity here at the city and in past municipal opportunities. And I have found that when I do fill in for those attorneys who have that as a routine job, the amount of time they spend listening to folks who come in for prosecutions to find out what was really going on, what the underlying cause is very important. And it's something that I don't always get to do in civil litigation that I almost envy of the prosecutors who do get to go out and actually find out what the underlying reason and rationale for somebody's behavior might be. You don't always get an answer, you don't always get a hopeful answer, but you do at least get that opportunity to talk your way through maybe some settlements, especially when they're low-lying offenses or ones that simply would be imposition of a fine. And the ability to hopefully help somebody come to a better resolution than simply say, I need you to write a check. I think is something that should be considered, and changes to our prosecutions of those low-lying, especially fee-imposed only types of offenses really should be considered in a thoughtful and strategic way. But also you have to balance the wanting to do something nice by somebody who seems very apologetic with also being fair to everyone. And this needs to be an equal system, so there needs to be certainly some accountability in place for having those differences in prosecutions handled the same for everybody who's committed the same offense.
Very good. And this next question will start with Phil, followed by Sarah and Matt. And the question is, how would you advise the city on handling protests and demonstrations while protecting First Amendment rights?
Very important. It's an area that we're used to advising on regularly. We have to protect the First Amendment right to free speech. We have to, at the same time, protect the public safety for all individuals in our public spaces. And those two things can and do happen and co-occur. We just saw it this past weekend with a very large demonstration downtown and across our country. And I'm happy to say that it was a very peaceful and productive demonstration here in the city of Grand Rapids. And you can bet we were talking about what are ways that we can get this right. One way that we've identified and that we think is a best practice is to reach out to organizers, help them learn some of the rules and regulations around free speech, the time, place, and manner restrictions, and help our community understand that this isn't that there are at times restrictions that have to be understood. So we've done that. We have a great department helping do that through the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. We have talked to groups to help with that in the past, and I think it's a good holistic approach to include the community when talking about expectations for free speech activities.
All right, Sarah.
Sorry, I left my microphone on. I'm going to definitely be supportive of a lot of what Phil said. Those two things between having to keep the public safety and also First Amendment rights, which is what this country is founded on, and we see more and more of those being torn away from us every day. It's going to be something that's going to be very important going forward into the future, and something that we're going to have to really pay attention to. I know I've litigated a number of First Amendment cases in my career. Fortunately, none at the city of Grand Rapids yet. But knowing what the four corners of the law are to help make practices that the police department and our community partners can live with is going to be more and more important and more necessary to educate not only the public but also our internal and external partners. And so I see that as being something that we're going to be seeing a lot of in the next year or two.
Well, I'm going to apologize in advance because this is going to be a very terse response because I think we're all in agreement. I agree with what Sarah and Phil said. I mean, I don't think there is any more fundamental and important right in this country than the First Amendment. And there are protests happening in northern Michigan where I'm from as well. And that's something I've had to advise clients on. And you got to have a really good reason for doing anything that impedes someone's ability to peacefully demonstrate. Some of the interesting things that I've had to deal with, though, beyond just the actual, the gatherings that we see, during the No Kings protests and things like that, is regulating signs is an interesting area of the First Amendment that I've had to deal with as well. People don't take down their political signs anymore. It doesn't matter if it's an election year. So those are issues I've had to deal with communities as well. They all kind of boil down to the same principle, really. I mean, you can't regulate speech based on the content of that speech, and you can't regulate a protester because you don't agree with their viewpoint. So I do agree. I mean, it's a fundamental right. I think that they need to be accommodated. So no matter the viewpoint, and sometimes there are groups that I may not personally agree with at all, and they have the same right to gather peacefully. So I agree with what the other two had to say.
Very good. We're going to move away from the topic of policing public safety and constitutional rights for a moment, but may return back to it and move into some questions related to equity and civil rights. And the first question, which we'll start with Sarah, followed by Matt and Phil, is can you give an example of how you would intervene if a city policy is legally defensible but produces inequitable outcomes?
Thank you, Greg. I did touch on this a little bit earlier, and I'll elaborate a little bit more. But there's a lot of times that I'm faced with in the civil litigation realm with a policy that is legally constitutional. And what the police officers have done, or others acting on behalf of the city, on behalf of the municipality, have done is according to policy, and that policy was vetted for legality. But once you see how it actually plays out in the real world, the city attorney and our staff, even myself in the litigation department, have the opportunity then to reach out to our stakeholders, reach out to the police chief, the training office, the commission, the city manager, and say, look, this is what's happening with this policy, which may be not the intended result, but it could be maybe managed in a better and different way. And while it's technically legal, I would recommend for the future that we maybe consider some changes and how to start those conversations internally in order to have more equitable results. That said, the city attorney's office should also have the ability to review policies on the front end for legality. I think that we do some of that work, but maybe it's not always as deliberate and strategic as it could be, and instead, once an issue arises, we're playing catch up from behind.
Yeah, just to sort of pick up where Sarah left off, I think sometimes it's always desirable to, from the outset, sort of look at what the potential downstream effects are going to be for given communities, and make sure that the law is going to be equitably applied. And it's sort of being clairvoyant, sometimes you're not going to pick all of it up. And I think that's where, like Sarah says, listening to the stakeholders in the community and taking that input to see, okay, in practice, how is this policy, this ordinance, whatever the case may be, how is this playing out? And I think at that point, that's where, again, I think because the Grand Rapids seems to be so intentional about getting that kind of input from the community, I think at that point, once we have, I don't think you need more than a couple examples of some disparate impact that a policy or ordinance might be having, to present the city commission with that at that point and say, okay, well, maybe we need to think about, rethink how we're doing this. Maybe we want to repeal this ordinance. Maybe we want to amend the ordinance. But yeah, I think you have to be flexible, because I think the reality is you're never going to catch all of this. I mean, it looks, as the question said, I mean, if it's legally defensible, it's hard to predict exactly how this is going to play out, exactly how it's going to impact a particular person or community. So I think being flexible, listening to the stakeholders, and when we've made a mistake, or maybe not a mistake, but I mean, of course, correction is necessary. I think we got to be prepared to make that correction.
So I think it's easy for a question like this to get lost in the world of policing. I know we're kind of pivoting. In a dynamic organization like the city, we provide a lot of governmental services across the city, whether it's picking up garbage, whether it's yard waste, whether it's plowing streets and ticketing cars. And we have to use that lens of equity in all of those areas, and policy review is one point. I know that the city commission hires a city attorney to give them direct, competent legal advice so that they can make good decisions. And I know that our elected officials get into this line of work because they care deeply about the city and the residents. And so I think there is an obligation as the advisor in chief to the city commission to make sure the city commission knows if we're seeing and hearing problems with any particular ordinance. Now, as both Sarah and Matt have indicated, we don't always get to make the decision, and very rarely does a city attorney make that decision to undo policy, but we have to have effective communication strategies with those decision makers, both department heads and elected officials, and be very open and honest with them to avoid those sorts of situations.
Thank you, all three. This next question will start with Matt, and then Phil, and then Sarah. And the question is, how would you ensure that legal advice provided to city departments consistently reflects equity considerations?
So again, I think that that's always the intention. We always want to make sure that policies are being put in place and being enforced that are equitable to all that are involved. But again, I think there is some difficulty. While we all share that goal, it is sometimes difficult to achieve before a policy is actually put into place. So I think, again, knowing, having the litigation background that we do, I think there's some ability to predict to some degree how a policy is going to impact communities, and trying to make sure that, whether it's the department heads, police officers, whoever's enforcing a given policy, just making sure, I'm always thinking in this question, dealing with an equal protection claim. If the law is being applied unequally to similarly situated people, that is the type of thing that I frequently advise, whether it's a zoning official or a police officer. It's pretty simple advice that I don't think you need to be a lawyer to understand. You need to apply the law exactly the same to every single person. And if you're applying it any differently from a previous situation, you better have a rational reason for doing so, because that's what a court is going to look at. And that's generally the advice. Again, this is a nice goal to have. I think in practice, it's difficult to achieve. That's where I think, going back to the last question, things are going to fall through the cracks, and you have to be receptive to input from the community and be willing to, tweak your approach or change the policy or repeal it altogether. Again, like Phil said, that's not our call. All we can do is give the information to the elected officials and, let them handle it the way they see fit.
So I think this is why having an in-house counsel for a city like the city of Grand Rapids is so helpful, because when we talk about equity, we have to consider the legal considerations, equitable protections for all citizens. But I think what I've experienced here is, through collaboration with department heads, we can go further. We can ask ourselves, what languages should some of our information be put out there in the community in to make sure that everybody has the same information? How can we recognize some of the differences that need to be recognized and have not historically been recognized in a lawful way. And the way that we collaborate with our department heads is they're the subject matter experts. And so we lean into them to come up with creative ideas. And then we kind of put that back up against the legal considerations to make sure that we're not having any unanticipated consequences. But one thing that remains true as a strategic value for the city of Grand Rapids is equity. And we will, through our department heads and our internal partners, have those conversations and do better than we've done in the past. And there are lawful ways to do that. And sometimes it's just having those conversations and not missing the low-hanging fruit, like translating some instructions in a different language, or something else on that scale that feels like an easy lift but might get missed if you're not having those responsible conversations.
I very much appreciate what both Phil and Matt had to say, and I'm going to kind of pick up where both of them left off. One is it's very important having this internal city attorney's office, because the city attorney's office can provide consistent advice. And consistency is what's going to be incredibly important in making sure that our decision-making and our policies are equitable and equitably applied across all different spectrums and areas of life. That kind of feeds off of what I said earlier. It's nice to talk about changing or being less forceful with justice programs, but at the same time, you do still have to apply the law consistently. And as an attorney, the gut reaction is to say, just apply the law, black and white. Of course it's black and white. It's always going to be the same answer. But we live, unfortunately, in a world that's a lot of gray. And you have to be able to maneuver those challenges that are in the in-between and still come up with some consistent answers that do reflect equity. And then to add on to a little bit of what Phil said, listen. And I think listening not just to the community, but also to our department heads, top management, and hear what they're seeing, why they're doing things in the policies that they are doing, and how we might change those to have a more equitable result if they're affecting one community more than another. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And this next question, we'll start with Phil, followed by Sarah and Matt. And that is, how would you engage with community groups, especially those representing historically underrepresented communities, when shaping legal strategies or policies?
In person is the best format, in my opinion. I like to go and be present in places and see parts of the community that maybe I wouldn't go in my day-to-day commute to and from City Hall. So the city attorney's office and the city attorney specifically can be a community connector and should be a community connector. We might not always be able to make the decision to change the thing right away, but we can bring the people to the table. I'm really proud of the network that our office has in our community with the other municipal law firms that are supportive, but more so than that, with our external organizations that help us understand what the priorities are with the community. So sometimes it's easier to send an email or send a text message, but there's nothing like a good old-fashioned, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's look each other in the eye. Let's recognize that we're both people. We might not always agree necessarily, but we can sit down and have those healthy conversations and find a way to work together. I think that doing that often, being an active listener, Sarah, thanks for reminding us of the importance of being a good listener, and connecting change agents in the community is a good strategy for that.
Thanks, Phil. Here, I'm gonna differ just a little bit and suggest that really the setting strategy and policies is much more the role of the decision makers. So as the city attorney, our impact is to guide and help shape those once a path or at least a destination has been decided on. Now, once, if the commission says we would like for our policy to change from A to B, city attorney, how do we get there? Now, that is the point where we need to listen not just internal to stakeholders, but also to those community groups. And sometimes that does come in the form of person-to-person or on the phone or meetings to talk about what those changes might look like. If there's certain key groups who have that knowledge base, but it's also going to say, I need to know exactly what you're proposing. And to get that kind of information in writing can also be very valuable because it's easier to distill, especially when you're trying to mediate and negotiate between a number of different ideas, concerns, and even motives. So that's, I think, going to be part of the city attorney's role, is to help the commission be able to look at a variety of different solutions and pick the best one, but also to provide them with options for what the different risks look like if you go with different choice or a blending of the decisions. I've spent a lot of time working in kind of a mediation capacity here at the city, but you do that a lot when you're negotiating with civil lawsuits too. And I think that to actually shape strategy and policy, you need to be a little bit of a mediator and try to work the room between all the different ideas and people that come from different places.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to that, I agree with Sarah. I think that we have to sort of resist the temptation as the city attorney to wade into policymaking, because that's not really our role at all. And sometimes that could be a difficult dance to do, to remain apolitical when you're being pulled in political directions. But it is important. But I think that in situations when, clearly something has not gone as planned and we're seeing inequitable, disparate impact, I think that's, again, where we need to be open to hearing from those stakeholders, those folks who are disparately impacted. And at that point, I agree with Phil. I think that's setting, meeting people where they are, seeing them face to face, hearing how these policies are affecting them in their day-to-day lives, I think is important, because I think often we kind of lose track of, when I say we, I mean municipal officers as a group. I think sometimes lose track of the fact that we are ultimately answerable to the citizens of Grand Rapids, and it's the role of everyone in the city to try to improve the lives of the people of the city of Grand Rapids. So I think, again, listening, I think is important, but again, we have kind of a dance we have to do as attorneys to provide objective legal advice and let the policy makers make the decision that they're going to make, because they're the ones more directly answerable to you all as the voters. But obviously it's not lost on us the importance and the gravity of this position specifically. This is a big city. A lot of people are impacted by the city's policies. So I think we always have to be open to that feedback. And again, kind of to repeat what I said before, be flexible and course correct when that's called for.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to questions regarding ethics and accountability. And we'll start with Sarah, followed by Matt and Phil. And the first question is, what safeguards would you implement to prevent political pressure from influencing legal decisions?
Political pressure from where? There's a lot of sources of political pressure, especially today. When that political pressure is coming from the city commission, from your client, and also in this role, your boss, that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. And to implement safeguards for that, I think the answer sometimes is going to be that there's a conflict of interest. Sometimes that body of work, whatever you're being asked to do, is going to have to go to outside counsel. But to the extent that that's not the answer, sometimes it's just having the hard conversation. I am not afraid and have shown it in my role, especially as a litigator, that I am perfectly content to be the person that has to go and deliver some harsh truths. And sometimes the political bosses, in this case, or the elected officials here for the city are going to need to hear from their legal advisor that what they're trying to do is really based on the current political moment or environment and is not based on sound legal principles or is not taking into account the future risk. So I think that having the ability and safeguards in place to have the forthright, have a city attorney who can stand up and make those hard decisions and those tough calls and be forceful with the elected officials when that's necessary, and also decide to back away from advising that body when the time comes.
Yeah, so my last answer kind of segued pretty nicely into this topic. So I agree with Sarah. I mean, it very much depends on where the political pressure is coming from, because if it's coming from the political animals, the actual elected officials, they're the policymakers. So at a certain point, I've certainly had occasions where, I may not have necessarily agreed with the direction we were moving in, but I know, and everyone up here knows, where we fall on the organizational chart and who we report to, and it's the city commission. I mean, our job ultimately is to help them to implement their policy objectives, because presumably that's why they were elected to serve in these roles. So we have to do that obviously in a way that they stay within the confines of the law. And so to some degree, the political pressure, I wouldn't even consider it pressure. They're responding to the politics of the moment, and that's how they formulate their policies. And that's where we come in to help them devise and implement those policies in a way that complies with the law. But if we're talking about political pressure in the sense of, from other, whether it be appointed officers or whatever the case may be, I think that's where, because I have had occasion for this to happen to me before with various city managers, county executives, where they may have a political objective that is maybe not the same as the elected officials, and you're being pulled in that direction by the elected officials, pulled in another by the appointed officer. And I think it's at that point we kind of have to remind ourselves of who we report to and where we fit in the organization. I mean, to have someone, because I've had people try to influence my opinions before. I give them a reasoned analysis that I spent hours and hours and hours researching, and they don't like the conclusion. They want it to come out a different way, and that's tough. That's what you hire us for. That's what we went to school for. That's what we have thousands and thousands of hours, practicing. So I think it's important to, I don't know that safeguards necessarily are necessary beyond sort of your own personal fortitude, knowing how you should handle those situations, when that type of, again, I wouldn't call it political pressure, but when politics are necessarily part of the equation.
Just briefly to add on to that, we have a Michigan Professional Rules of Responsibility and a Code of Ethics as attorneys that I know all three of us take very seriously and help us make those decisions. We have trusted relationships in our legal community if we feel like we're being tested in a way that would compromise our dedication to those professional rules and ethics. But I think the most effective way to navigate through that is to build trust with your client and to build trust with the other partners in your organization. Sometimes you have to be that bold voice that stands up and gives difficult legal advice. Other times, if you know the people well enough, you might know that you can get better attention by asking for some collaboration with other leaders in the organization. And so I think we all kind of set an iteration of this. It depends on the facts and the circumstances, which is classic lawyer answer, I know, but really those relationships are critical to navigating through some of those challenging political issues that might test your ethical fortitude.
All right, and then on the same topic, next question, we'll start with Matt, followed by Phil and Sarah. and that is, how do you interpret the ethical obligations of the city attorney when the interests of city officials could conflict with the broader public interest?
I imagine we're going to get quite a bit of overlap in this topic, but could you give me that one more time, Greg, please?
Sure. How do you interpret the ethical obligations of the city attorney when the interests of city officials conflict with the broader public interest?
Well, again, it's one of those questions that, the broader public interest, who determines what that is? That's normally, I would expect the elected officials to determine that, and that's who we ultimately serve. So that would put me, I think, in an awkward position where I may be wading into policy considerations. Ultimately, our obligation, first and foremost, is to make sure that the city is operating within the confines of the law, and I think that's where our purview, to some degree, stops. I mean, if it's keeping in mind what we talked about before. I mean, it should always be the goal to look at what the downstream effects are of a policy in a given situation. But beyond that, certainly that's something we should be looking at. But beyond that, I think the way that the public interest is affected more broadly is something that the policymakers really need to consider, not necessarily the city attorney's office.
Yeah, the rule of law is just so critically important, forever, but especially these days. And so we have our city charter, which is a document that establishes our city government. We need to follow our city charter. There are state laws that impact the way municipalities operate, the Home Rule Cities Act. And so those are kind of some guiding principles that we cannot stray away from, and we can help educate and reiterate the importance of the rule of law, and I think lawyers have a duty to reiterate how important the rule of law is in our community and how much our democracy and free society depend on it. And so in the city, our city charter is really important. I don't know that everybody knows that the city has its own constitution of sorts, but that's usually where we start. And most often when you can point to a very direct provision of law, people can understand the gravity a little bit better. So knowing that city charter, knowing the state law, those all help us overcome those challenging times as well.
As Matt said, I think that we're all going to be on a similar page for this one. But a city attorney represents the municipal corporation. And the municipality, well, you don't think of a city as a corporation, that's pretty much how it's formed. And the commission is the board of directors. They're our client. So their decisions are the direction that the city attorney has to take, and that's our ethical obligation. But at the same time, as attorneys, our other ethical obligation is that we can't condone or aid in illegal orders. So to the extent that the city commission was trying to take something against the broader public interest, if that was an illegal act, that is certainly something that we would need to step into and say, I cannot help you with this. It might even require some reporting elsewhere to the Attorney General's office. Unfortunately, I would never want to be in that situation, and I don't believe that this commission would ever take us there. But we do have very, very clear rules of ethics that I think that Matt and Phil and I all take very seriously, and that's going to be our number one priority. That said, if the broader public interest wasn't being served, but it was not rising to the level of being illegal, you would hope that the city attorney would have enough of the ear of the city commission to say, hey, look, this might not be an illegal proposition, but this is going to be the result, and this is the risk that you're taking by actually negatively impacting the broader community. So why don't we reconsider this and come up with some different solutions, some more creative solutions to maybe get you some of where you're trying to go.
All right, very good. We're going to move on to a couple questions on public trust, transparency, and communication. And we'll start with Phil, followed by Sarah and Matt. And the first one is, what specific steps would you take to make the city attorney's office more transparent to the public?
Well, more transparent to the public. I think the city attorney can and should be in community, and you should know kind of what the city attorney stands for, not necessarily politically, but that the city attorney is representing the community well. We have things like the Freedom of Information Act and other opportunities to lean into transparency in government. We also have a really important duty of confidentiality to the client, and we have to adhere to that under our professional rules of ethics. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable. There are communication strategies that the city attorney's office can help the city be more transparent and be responsible in talking about matters that are happening in our jurisdiction. I'm open to ideas on that one. The city attorney's office, since I've been there, has been pretty transparent. We're out in community. We've done volunteerism, helping at things like an expungement fair. We work collaboratively with our Grand Rapids Bar Association. So we're very proud of the work that we do in the community, but we're always open to ideas that might allow us to do that, so long as we're not offending the principles of attorney-client confidentiality and our role as advocates for our client.
Yeah, in case you didn't pick up on that from Phil's answer, transparency as an attorney is really hard because we are really governed closely by the rules of confidentiality. With that, there's a lot of things that we simply can't disclose. Some of it's grounded in law, some of it's grounded in our ethical rules, and our hands are tied. That said, for purposes of transparency, I think outreaching more to the community in the realm of education and educating the public on what the city does, what the city attorney does and doesn't do, I think would be an important way to increase transparency so that the public could understand our role and also how we affect government a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm glad those two had to answer that first. That's the same. I mean, when I saw that was one of the topics for this forum, I kind of knew that's where this was going. But to echo exactly what they said, I mean, we do have our limitations, but I get it. I think what I've experienced is that there is it's kind of baked into our DNA as a country, a distrust of government. And I think that sometimes the lack of communication only plays into that because people, when you're not telling them what's going on, I think that they may jump to the conclusion that you're either doing nothing, just completely ineffectual, or you're doing something nefarious. And that's usually, if not always, not the case, but we have our limitations on what we can disclose. I have had situations where my communities have like really big political hot button issues, and they choose to waive privilege, and we talk about some things in open meetings, limited things, but it's not necessarily a step that I, really relish because that raises all sorts of questions when you're giving oral opinions at an open meeting. But if that's something the policymakers want to do, they could certainly do it. But beyond that, Phil mentioned FOIA. I mean, that's something, having litigated a number of FOIA cases, I am, they come to me after someone else has already processed the FOIA request, and you kind of just groan because like, okay, well, you redacted way more than you needed to, you withheld more than you needed to. So I think, following FOIA, I think to the T, and really exempting the bare minimum material, I think goes a long way towards transparency, because that is a great tool for the public to stay informed, provided public agencies aren't sort of manipulating it and withholding information improperly. So I think, just strict adherence to FOIA and getting as much information as you can out through that avenue. And, I'm open to, I will say that I've been doing a lot of research on the city of Grand Rapids, being the one, guy from out of town. I will say that this city city as a whole, I think, does a pretty darn good job at proactively communicating. I've never seen as many commissioners post weekly, whatever the case is, videos, updates on what's going on in their ward, the city manager doing the same thing. I think I would be open to emulating something like that, but like we've all said, it has its limitations, so it may not leave people very satisfied, but it's something I would be open to.
All right, thank you. And we're going to start back on this next question with Sarah and then Matt and then Phil. And that is, how would you handle situations where legal advice is sound but unpopular with the public?
Isn't that what most lawyers do every day? Unfortunately, being an attorney is often having to give bad news. Especially as a litigator, I'm usually seeing my clients or those who are directly impacted by a lawsuit firsthand on one of their worst days, because they've just found out that they've been sued for something that they did, whether or not the lawsuit has merit, but somebody has been harmed. So getting politically unpopular decisions is never easy. It's not something that public officials who are serving want to do. They don't want to go against the public, and that, I think, weighs in back to the question that you asked previously about something that maybe was having a lot of public pressure. With that, the advice is always going to be to follow what is lawful and what is legal. And the politicians and the city commissioners are the ones that really have the hard decision to make, and that's whether to follow the attorney's advice, which is going to be risk adverse and following the law, but isn't always the politically correct answer. And sometimes the attorney needs to be the scapegoat, and that's just part of the nature of the position.
Yeah, so I'm going to expand on it a little bit, not just, yes, we've all given unpopular legal opinions, but I want to, not just unpopular to the public. I mean, I've had situations where, so the question is, what do we do when we're delivering that unpopular advice? Well, I had a situation not that long ago where I provided some advice that was, I don't know how it really resonated in the public. I don't know how they received it, but I know that the elected officials didn't care for it. It was legally sound, and they opted not to follow that advice. And I will say, just to point out that they are still dealing with the fallout from that because of what I told them not to do. But at any rate, at that point, I think our obligation becomes, again, because we are answerable to those public officials, or those elected officials. At a certain point, we don't weigh into policy. We can't dig our heels in and, express our frustration that they didn't listen to us. You just got to pivot at that point, because, I mean, in that situation, I saw the writing on the wall. They weren't going to listen to what I was saying, and you can only say it so many times. You just put the information in front of them, and they're going to do what they're going to do with it. And when they made the decision against my advice, I had to pivot and put them in the best position possible for the inevitable fallout that was coming, and that's what I did. So I think that's all you can do. You can't, I don't think anybody up here would be influenced by, you're not writing a memo wondering how angry people are going to be when they read it. I mean, the law is the law. We're just faithfully applying the facts, putting the information in front of the elected officials, and that's what our job is.
Yeah, I think those are great remarks, and I agree with both of your sentiments. I think there's also opportunities to commit to continue to listen, and being comfortable in uncomfortable places, and being in a room where people are not happy with the city, or perhaps the city attorney's office for one reason or another, and being able to stay in that room and look people in the eye and listen. I think that goes a long way. It shows your client that you're not missing the mark in terms of your engagement, and it allows you to make those confident decisions moving forward. There are strategies. If the law is clear as day. There are strategies to have additional helpful attorneys either in your office, give additional support to your opinion and things like that. And so I think I appreciate both your answers, and I think committing to listen and be present in those uncomfortable places is important too.
Okay, we're going to move on and take a question related to housing development and redevelopment. We'll start with Matt, followed by Phil and Sarah. And the question is, how would you, or what is your approach toward legal issues related to affordable housing, especially when balancing public interests and developer interests?
It's a great question. There are a number of tools that communities can make use of to increase the supply of affordable housing. I've personally been through a few different brownfield projects where, for those of you who aren't aware, I mean, historically, brownfield was sort of used to rehabilitate old industrial sites, things like that. I don't remember when it was amended, but the statute was amended to greatly expand what you can do with brownfield, and a lot of my communities now are using it to bridge the gap between sort of the market rate for rents and a subsidy. I'm sorry, to bridge that gap between capping it at usually like 150% of the median income and what the market rate is, to sort of make that an affordable option. It has its limitations. I believe I don't know if it's baked into brownfield itself, but some of these tools are time limited. You only do it for a certain number of years, and I know that's a little frustrating for some communities. But I think being nimble and using tools like brownfield, using pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, I think is a great tool as well. Because I think the reality is, I mean, I remember being at a conference for the Michigan Municipal Attorneys of Michigan conference a few years ago, and a developer was there talking to this topic, and the reality is it doesn't really make financial sense for the developers to make these subsidized units. They don't want to do it. They don't make as much money off of it. So that's where I think communities have to be creative. This is clearly a critical issue. I will say that the city is doing some pretty novel things already that no matter how this process pans out, I plan to take to my cities that I represent currently, like the Permit Ready Plan program, just sort of streamlining the ability to get approvals to construct new housing, I think is a great thing. The other thing that a lot of communities are doing too is sort of revisiting their zoning ordinances to see if there's some tweaks that can be made, whether it's reducing setbacks or increasing allowable density. I think things like that are very important, and there may be some more options coming from Lansing soon. I personally don't. I hope this doesn't happen. I don't know if these guys have seen it as well, but there are at least some talk in Lansing of making sort of like state level rules for what maximum setbacks can be and things like that. I don't necessarily want to see that happen. I think communities like home rule cities like Grand Rapids should have some flexibility to say what their communities look like. But again, I think that the bottom line is clearly a problem, lots of tools at our disposal. We just really have to figure out ways to incentivize private developers to come in and build these units. And I have some clients too who have actually taken it into their own hands. They can't do it at the same scale that a private developer can, but I mean, I've seen some of my communities have housing commissions that have built subsidized housing. So I think we just have to the bottom line is we have to be creative and look at what all the options are.
Yeah, Matt hit the nail on the head with the tools that are in the governmental toolbox. We have tax increment financing, and we have land use through our zoning code. What I can tell you is that Grand Rapids has taken advantage of transformational brownfield, which is a recent state law change that has allowed us to be more aggressive with brownfield opportunities in a way that the traditional brownfield hasn't allowed. And that's a big testament to some of our private-public partnerships that have been so important. So what the city attorney needs to do is make sure that we have a deep bench of attorneys that understand the complexity of those sorts of legal issues. It's something that has evolved even in the 6 years that I've been here. We've been lucky to have attorneys that have been interested in that. We have experts in land use. I've been able to dip my toe in the water and be involved in some of those transactional situations and advise some of the boards and commissions that are responsible for making those decisions. And we need to make sure that our wonderful staff of attorneys and support team in the Department of Law continue to stay on top of that ever-changing law. Our city is growing. It's hard to build housing in cities. We don't have a ton of green space to do that work, so we've got to get creative and use the tools that we have. And the law department needs to give good advice to those subject matter experts in the economic development department, in the planning department, and we have to have strong relationships with our internal group as well as external.
I think that my colleagues here have talked about quite extensively the tools that are in the toolbox and our ability to help come up with some out-of-the-box solutions, which certainly we've been doing here at the city in the last several years, and we definitely have a lot of subject matter expertise in-house and with our partners. But one of the things that the city attorney also has done and will continue to do is to mediate those sorts of tensions and negotiate between public and developer interests, and just to be kind of a sounding board to help come up with maybe a third path that's not everything the developer wants, everything the public wants, and to present something to our client that maybe at least hits the high notes and gets us part of the way there.
All right, thank you. We're going to go back and return to policing, public safety, and constitutional rights. And this question will go to Phil, followed by Sarah and Matt. And that is, when police misconduct cases arise, how should the city attorney balance defending the city with holding officers accountable?
Well, at the forefront of this, it goes back to the rule of law. We have collective bargaining agreements in place, and we must adhere to those collective bargaining agreements as it relates to employee investigations, employee discipline, and that's critical. Sometimes situations do involve civil litigation, and when you have civil litigation co-occurring with employment matters, it's challenging, but it's not impossible to navigate both of those cases. Sometimes we utilize outside counsel to help mitigate any perceived conflicts or balance the workload. And so I'm really proud of the relationships that we have with our outside counsel partners, as well as internally, the growth that we've done in employment law matters. But, you know, when there's a policy violation by any employee, whether that's police or across the board in the city, there needs to be accountability. And what I've experienced is most other employees in those divisions also expect accountability. We all, as lawyers, have a self-governing profession where we're required, if we see other attorneys violating the code of ethics, to say something and hold each other accountable. And I've noticed in my time here, other departments, including the police department, are willing to hold each other accountable as well. There's no other profession or department that has more oversight and accountability at the federal, the state, the local level than the police department. But as the city attorney, we really have to be mindful and respectful of the collective bargaining agreements that are in place.
Thanks, Phil. This question hits on probably my two biggest areas of expertise. I handle a ton of civil rights litigation. I'm often the first one to see some of the video before it goes out when there's a critical incident, and also to hold the officer account. I'm also usually on the end where, you know, once they may have been held to account, we're seeing grievance arbitration about that discipline that was effectuated through our collective bargaining process. it's not an easy tension. You want to defend the officer because they're an employee, but sometimes defending the city is really instilling discipline and making sure that the officer is held to account. When those actions are taken that are really serious, I'm the first one, and former chief will be the one to even say that I'd be on the phone going, hey, look, this is bad. This does not comport with what we're about and what city policy and police department training should be. And I'm usually the first one to say, look, something needs to be different here. And I think that that is part of defending the city, to make sure that our officers are doing their job in accordance with not only policy, but also the law. There is a difficult balance when it does come to collective bargaining. We've got to make sure that we abide by the agreements that we've made there and honor the city's end of the bargain, whether that's confidentiality for the officer, progressive discipline, or making sure that they know that what they did maybe was in error. In my experience, most officers really do try to abide by their training, their policies and procedures, and what they understand the law to be. And in those rare instances where that's something really outside of policy, I'd be the absolute first one to tell the key stakeholders what's going on.
Yeah, and the only thing I have to add to that, and just so I'm clear, I'm interpreting this question to be those sort of areas where did we violate someone's civil rights? No. Did we violate an internal policy? Potentially. I agree with everything else that that Phil and Sarah said. I mean, we have to be cognizant of the language of the CBA, but there are things the city attorney can do to ensure the integrity of investigations, to make sure that people are being held to account for violating policy, for proactively offering guidance on maybe changing policy. If something happens that's not technically in violation of an existing policy, well, maybe we need to, again, not our position to devise the policy, but maybe to flag for the police chief or whomever else that maybe this is something we need to take a closer look at. But that's where, in organizations like the OPA here in the city of Grand Rapids, I think, play a pretty critical role there in making sure that the investigations are thorough and complete, and officers are held to account. And I will say too, though, that the failure of the city to do something in those situations, because I've had cases before where officers have a history of excessive force. Not to get too into the weeds, but I mean, that's the type of claim, we call it a Monell claim, where it's actually against the municipality itself for failing to act. And that in and of itself is a problem that we need to address by actually doing something when these critical incidents arise, even if that's just investigating and exonerating the officer, which I'm sure will happen from time to time.
Okay, we're going to finish up with one more question. We've gotten through the questions a little faster than I thought we would. So the last topical question, and you started that one?
Yep.
So this is back to Sarah, and then Matt, and then Phil. And that question is, how should the city attorney advise the city regarding cooperation with federal agencies, particularly when local policies may conflict with federal priorities?
Follow the law. Be a short answer there. Priorities are one thing, but the law is another. So if the law is simply that the federal government has jurisdiction, the city has to comply with the law, whether or not the city officials like it, and whether or not the city wants to do that. But that's got to be the advice of the city attorney, is to follow the law.
Yeah, and I imagine that part of that question was maybe motivated by sort of the interplay between federal ICE agents and local law enforcement. I'm reading too much into that question, but I agree with Sarah. I mean, ultimately the advice is follow the law. I mean, to the extent my understanding, admittedly, this isn't something I've had to come across and really research myself. To the extent there's any sort of voluntary cooperation, if that's a policy decision that the city wanted to make, that it didn't want to voluntarily comply with a certain, again, I'm kind of reading into it that that's what this question was aimed at. could they make a policy decision? As long as it's consistent with the law, that's, again, ultimately the decision for the city commission to make. But yeah, I don't think it's any more complicated than if the law requires you to take an action, you may not like it, you need to do it.
Not too much to add to that. I think that, what goes before that is knowing the law, and that's the first and foremost job for the city attorney and the Department of Law team is to know the law, because we do have some local control, although sometimes it feels like preemption is consuming us more and more through state and federal governmental actions, but we need to know where we are not preempted from acting and where we have some space to live and make policy. And so knowing the law and following the law. If we can't follow the law as a municipal government, how can we expect our citizens and our employees and the people that live here to do the same? So we got to lead by example on that front and understand what our role is when you have those different layers of government involved.
All right, thank you all, and thank you all for the torture test of so many questions. We're going to move into some closing remarks, and we'll change the order. So we'll go with Matt first, then Phil, and then Sarah.
All right, well, first and foremost, everyone, I know there's not a huge crowd here, but thank you for the people who did show up and whoever might be watching, and I don't know if they're listening, but the people who were here, there was a huge group throughout the day. It was really, truly kind of impressive to see. I don't remember a single person's name, but it was nice to see that many people involved in this important process. So thank you for anyone who was involved. And I will say, when you're up against two other people, it kind of feels going into it like these are my, competitors. I did get to talk to them. These are two lovely people, and I think no matter who the city commission ultimately picks, I think you guys are going to be just fine. You're going to be in great hands. So I want to let everyone know that I understand and appreciate the great responsibility that comes with holding this job. I know how important it is, not just to the city government, but again, to the people who live here. The impact that we have is felt throughout the city, and that's not something that is lost on me. And I will tell you that I have worked very, very hard over the course of the last 13 years to have a pretty pristine reputation for doing the right thing. You may not always agree with something that I do, but I guarantee you it comes from a place of I'm just trying to get the right answer. We're doing the best that we can. So that's something you could take comfort in, that if I am the one chosen to fill this position, I'm going to hold myself and everyone that works with me to the highest ethical standards. I know these two will as well. But importantly, too, I think dealing with people with kindness and empathy is important, and something that sometimes gets lost for lawyers. And that's something that would be a priority for me, continuing the former city attorney's efforts to emphasize restorative justice, police reform. These are things that are very important to me as well. I've got close family members I've watched to get chewed up and spit out by the criminal justice department, and it's hard to watch. I think it's something. We're not going to fix it here in Grand Rapids. I think as a country, maybe we need to rethink the way we do criminal justice. But equitably applying the law, and treating people with kindness and getting them the services they need, if that's what's needed in a certain situation. But I would commit to transparency as well. Again, we have those limitations imposed by our ethical rules and attorney-client privilege, but I get it. I understand that there's a great level of distrust of government. I can tell you years and years of serving along lots of different people in lots of different communities. Most of the people, they're just trying to do the best that they can. They're trying to do a difficult job and often a thankless job. But it would be a great honor to work here. I love this city. We got lots of fond memories of this city. I grew up a little further south, closer to Kalamazoo than here, but this was always like the big city for me when I was growing up. And I've since been dispelled of that notion because I spent some time working in New York before law school, so I know that this is not really a big city, but it's kind of like that Goldilocks zone for me, where it's got some big city amenities, but it's kind of got some small town feel. So the prospect of being in a community and being an integral part of a visible part of the community is very, very exciting to me. and helping the city commission along in their policy objectives. I think, again, they're trying to do some big things, and I hope they get there, and I know with any of the three of us up here that they are going to get there. So, again, thank you for your time. I hope to see you all again. Thanks.
Yes, to you.
All right, thank you, Sarah and Matt. It's been great, Sarah, working with you. I'm excited to continue to work with you, Matt. It's been great to know you, and I have no doubt that we're a great slate of candidates for the City Commission to consider. I am really proud of the last 6+ years of my service to the city of Grand Rapids as the deputy city attorney. I also am really proud of the last 7 months of my term as the interim city attorney. What I'm really excited about is for the future, if I'm selected as the next city attorney. Our profession and our practice is changing. Technology is changing the way we do things. It is important to recruit and retain very skilled attorneys because the city attorney cannot do it all. We have a great team in the law department right now, and I'm excited to explore ways on how we can continue to recruit and retain excellent city attorneys so that we can work on behalf of the organization, but on behalf of the citizens. I intentionally made a decision when I got this job. I didn't really have a choice being in the UP, but to move here, to live here. My first rented house was on Lafayette and Pleasant by Pleasant Park, and not long after that, we moved to the Easttown neighborhood where I'm raising 2 wonderful kids, and my wife works for the city, and we are public servants through and through. If selected, we will continue that service to the community. I coach softball at MLK Park in the summers for the Ted Raspberry League at the YMCA, and I've been trusted by the local legal community to serve as the Grand Rapids Bar Association president. All of those things, I think, should help the city feel reassured that the future for the city attorney's position is bright. The city can continue to receive excellent legal services that they've enjoyed through Anita Hitchcock's leadership. She is a dear friend and a mentor and continues to stay connected to the office. I commit that I will work hard to hear from community. I'm not going to be driven or make decisions that are not in the best interest of the city, but I will be a great listener. I'm committed to listening to our internal staff, and I'm committed to listening to our client. Those have been our 3 pillars in the law department. How is our staff doing? How is our client doing? And how is the community doing? If we continue to focus on that and have a strategic plan forward on how we're going to grow and anticipate the changing legal practice, we're going to be doing very great things for a long time to come. And I thank you, Greg, for your time and your dedication to our great city, and I'm grateful to work with all my colleagues here at the city.
I'm going to pick up where Phil left off. I want to thank everybody who's here, but I definitely want to thank Phil and my colleagues who do work with me in the Department of Law. They're really the reason that I decided to put in for this position. We have such a fantastic department and fantastic group, and we all strive every day to provide the highest quality legal services to this client that we possibly can, and I absolutely commit to do that either in a new role or continuing on in the role that I'm currently in. I'm absolutely honored to have been selected to this process. I never, growing up, would have dreamed that I would be here. To my parents and my husband are probably watching this remotely, I know that they are very proud. My parents did not have the opportunities that I've had to get a higher education. I'm the first in my family to go to any sort of graduate school, let alone become an attorney and have the opportunity now to be running for the city attorney for the second largest city in the state. It's really, truly an honor to be here. I know that the city and this country as a whole are facing some very challenging and difficult times. And we here at the City of Grand Rapids are going to need legal leadership that is proven and ready to roll up their sleeves, come up with creative solutions to very difficult problems, and face those problems in court and against bigger government actors as needed. I've got that experience, and I hope to be able to continue to do that either as the next city attorney or through our litigation division. I very much appreciate Phil's work. He has done a fantastic job stewarding us and our department through the last 6 months, and I wouldn't be here without his leadership and cooperation as well. Matt, it's been very nice to meet you today, and I look forward to this process being over, as I think that we are all ready to be done with our very long interview process. I appreciate everybody who's come out, whether they served on a panel today or they're here in the audience, but thank you all for being here.
All right, and as we wrap up this evening's event, we just would like to take an opportunity to remind everyone that's either here or watching, there is an opportunity to provide feedback that will be relayed directly to the City Commission to be included in this process. There is a QR code in the room on your screen, and anyone here in the room can also submit feedback through a form, the old way. And as we wrap up, I would just also like to thank the candidates for all their hard work and preparation, as much time and effort as they put in today. I know they spent many, many, many hours preparing for this as well, and we're still not done. We have another step tomorrow. So thank you all and have a good evening.